Hello, we're going to talk about oil paint for a bit. What is oil paint? Oil paint was invented in the 15th century in Holland, possibly by Jan van Eyck himself. Before the advent of oil paint, artists would use egg tempera, which would be the yolk of an egg, as a binder, and then they would add the pigments to it. And the pigments are usually, or at least early on, they were natural materials like iron oxide and lapis lazuli and zinc and lead and that sort of thing. Oil paint has a few advantages over other kinds of paint, especially acrylic. Acrylic, as you well know, is a plastic-based paint. It's water soluble while you're mixing. The disadvantage of it is that it dries super fast, and for some that's a pro and some that's a con. I like to have more time to go back and rework things. I believe that oil paint allows one to be more thoughtful when you paint. You don't have to just commit, and it also gives you a lot more flexibility in the way that you apply paint. Oil paint, because it dries so slow, you can glaze it on, you can do an impasto application of paint. It just gives you a lot of flexibility. So I thought I would show you how oil paint is mixed together, and you can still do this today. You can still get the pigments. I have some titanium dioxide, which is used to make titanium white. So I thought we would just mix it together a little bit. There's the pigment. And then once you get the pigment, you add oil for a binder. And the oil usually is linseed oil, which is fairly standard and has been the standard for about 600 years. The advantage of linseed oil is that it does dry. There are other oils that don't dry, like olive oil or vegetable oil or that sort of thing. You can try other oils too if you like, and it'll give you different results. The texture of the paint will also give you different results depending on how much oil you add. I've added a lot of oil here, but if I don't want it to be this runny or viscous, then I can just add more pigment. And these are fairly cheap and affordable. The whole reason that oil paint became popular was in the 19th century. The Impressionists began to want to go and paint a la plein air, outside in front of their subject, and to have to mix your paint on site in front of a church ruin or a garden or something like that was not very practical. So then they came up with tubed oil paint, like you're all familiar with. It comes in a metal tube most of the time. Early on, they would pre-mix their paint and put them in pig's bladders and then seal it with an ivory tack. And then you would just squirt out the paint that you wanted. But once oil paint began to be mass manufactured, it allowed portability, it allowed for brighter colors, which is why the Impressionist paintings are so bright and happy and fun. And it allows a lot more flexibility with what you want to produce. So this is how oil paint is made. There are different kinds of paint. There are student grade paints and there are artist grade paints. There are pure colors and there are hues. The main difference between student grade paints and artist grade paints is pigment load. That is the amount of actual pigment that is combined in with the binder. Student grade paints are typically less expensive, but the colors are less intense. There's also the aspect of getting variations with the actual color. So what I have here is a cadmium red hue paint. And then here I have a proper artist grade cadmium paint. Is it really made with cadmium? I don't think so, but it may be. The whole reason they came up with hues versus pure paints is because some of the minerals used in the pure paints were toxic. They were radioactive, they were poisonous, like cadmium. Cadmium's radioactive. But as far as the difference in the two, there's not much. When you see hue, that just means they get the same color, but they use different materials to get that color. So that's our Winsor & Newton cadmium red. Here's the Dick Blick version of cadmium red. They're very similar. If we spread it out a bit. By the way, when you open a tube of paint brand new and you have this oil come out, that is okay. That is just the settling of the binder, and the binder is the liquid that binds these pigments together. That's just a little bit of separation there. But there's our pure cadmium red. This is our cadmium red hue. And this is a cadmium red medium, in case you're curious. They're essentially the same. I feel like the pure hues are maybe just a little bit more vivid, pure colors rather than the hues. So this all has to do with what type of paint you want to paint with. If you're first learning how to oil paint, student grade is just fine. It's cheap. You don't have that stress of going, oh no, I have a $30 tube of paint, I don't want to mess it up. Get the cheap paint, mess it up, it's okay. Figure it out, experiment, all of that's just fine. Within paints though, there are a few factors to consider. There's the issue of light fastness. Light fastness just means how long it takes to fade. If it's a grade 1, then it takes 100 years before you notice any fading at all. If it's grade 2, that means it's okay, but it's not the best. And then grade 3 means it's gonna fade regardless. And usually your red paints are gonna fade first. My advice, don't worry about it. Let the conservators and the museum curators figure that out after you're dead and your work is selling for millions of dollars. So save a few bucks if you want to. If you want more vivid hues, get those artist grade paints that have more pigment in them. Light fastness, you're probably pretty good if you don't hang your finished painting in direct sunlight. Let's see. Hues. There are hues that have emerged because older pigments are no longer available at all. I know I'm jumping all over the place. I'm trying to tell you everything I can think of about oil paint. But one of my favorite stories about oil paint is Mummy Brown. There used to be a paint called Mummy Brown, and it was called Mummy Brown because it was made from ground up mummies all over Europe. When mummies first started being discovered in Egypt, they were not valuable at all. Trains would use them as fuel to run a locomotive. They were fodder to start fires for your home cooking fire, that sort of thing, and they would grind them up and make this shade of brown. Obviously, they don't make Mummy Brown anymore, but there's a close second to it. Just like ivory black is not made from charred bones and teeth of animals. So it's just a simulation of things that used to be. Going back to light fastness, there are organic pigments and inorganic pigments. Inorganic meaning minerals, organic being things like your quinacridone colors, reds and oranges, and your dioxazines, purples. Here's a dioxazine purple. This is a Winsor & Newton tube, and it says Winton on there. That means it's the lesser grade. This is a student grade purple, which is just fine for me. I use student grade paints and mix them in with the artist grade paints. It doesn't really matter a whole heck of a lot to me. It's just your own personal preference. Here's a quinacridone red. It's a organic red. It's pretty vivid, dark, and visceral. I like to use that when painting, I don't know, tomatoes or blood or whatever it is you need to paint. It's got a good tact to it though. Anyway, your organic colors are gonna fade faster than your inorganic colors. The bottom line is it doesn't matter a heck of a lot. I think the main thing to be concerned about would be artist grade versus student grade. The artist grade is going to have more pigment, give you more vivid colors, and it'll stretch a lot longer. Oil paint also has an appeal to buyers. If you ever plan on selling your work, a lot of collectors and buyers like to have traditional oil painted paintings versus acrylic. There's a stigma attached to acrylic because it's a more modern painting medium. People want tradition. So give the people what they want. This is the material that artists have used for 500 years. It's perfectly fine. Enjoy it. Don't get apprehensive about it, and don't be afraid of it. Just remember, it's only paint.